Hello, this is Pamela Baird, your boundaries coach, and let's talk boundaries, shall we? Today we have a very amazing topic, and that topic is the purpose of the pause. As I pause, when it comes to setting the right boundaries. My guest today is Theresa Wright Johnson, and as we go along, I can't wait for you to hear her. As I indicated, I have a phenomenal guest today, but as we're preparing to learn about Ms. Theresa Wright Johnson, I want you to remember to subscribe to this podcast because we want to make sure that you don't miss anything that comes up with all my wonderful guests. So here we go. I want to introduce you to Ms. Theresa Wright Johnson. So I'm going to put my glasses on because she's got a long list of credentials, and I'm going to share a lot with you because I want you to understand the significance of having her here with me as we conversate about that pause and the purpose of that pause when it comes to setting healthy boundaries. Theresa Wright Johnson is a community servant who for decades has been using her lived life experiences to help others. She has overcome some very trying challenges such as losing children, having special needs children, domestic violence, mental health, and poverty. Through all of these things, she decided to take the lessons learned and learn more about each challenge that she went through so she could successfully help others. One of the reasons why I have her here with me today. Theresa now teaches and supports others as a certified trainer, facilitator, and advocate on domestic violence, mental health, parenting, and grief. She also provides women resources and support to get out of domestic violence situations via training and information. So I know Theresa partners with a lot of volunteer organizations, but just from the information I share with you, you can kind of get a sense of her heart and her passion. So I want to be able to introduce you to Miss Theresa so she can tell you a little bit more about herself and why she agreed to be on this podcast with me today. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to Miss Theresa Wright Johnson. Take it away.
Okay, thank you so much, Pamela, for having me. I'm so excited to be here. I really am just really here because I saw Pam. Pam was amazing talking about boundaries, and I believe in boundaries. And someone that has been through so many things, had I not set some boundaries or some limits or some boundaries on what I would experience or want to experience in life, I would not be where I am as a certified parent educator, mental health instructor, life coach, and business coach now because you have to set boundaries. So I'm here because I got to meet the wonderful Pamela, and I believe in her podcast and the message and the messages, not just the messages that she has on here when it pertains to her different guests and about the content that she provides. I always want to be a part of something in my life. Use my live life experience to help people, and I always want to partner and connect with people like that.
Thank you for that. I appreciate that. So I'm going to start out right with some questions. As you know, we're talking about the purpose of the pause when it comes to setting healthy boundaries. But I'm curious because I can tell your passion from your experiences that you've had. But how did you begin or realize the importance of setting boundaries? And what was it that gave you the courage to do it?
One of the things that gave me the courage to do it is my children. That was one thing. And also from seeing people that didn't set boundaries. So that's one thing or two things. So being a mother, I couldn't stay in that domestic violence situation and be a great mother and raise girls or children, right? And so I needed to set the boundary, not just for them, but for me, because what was I allowing myself? And I'm going to be honest, when I tell people about domestic violence, people think about domestic violence, only certain women or certain types of people. I'll tell you, I needed to get out of that situation too, because you also could start becoming abusive because I was fighting back. And so I wanted to get out of that situation too, because I didn't want to put myself in any place or space mentally, physically, or legally that I couldn't be a parent to my children.
So the courage came from considering other people that would have that you would have a major impact on their life, their entire life, even your children from childhood to adulthood. So your decision was not necessarily based just on you, even though you needed to be safe, but you had to set an example for your girls, right?
I had to set an example for my girls. But one thing as a mom or a parent or an adult, I had to set a true example for myself. I knew that that was not the situation for me. I had self talk going in my head trying to tell me I need to stay in this relationship. It's comfortable because my children have a mother and a father. You have certain economical things. You might be scared out of your mind before you throw yourself out there, right? But that boundary had to be made so I could have a better me and be available to be a better me in the future for my children, and my children would be better. So I really had to make sure to set a boundary for myself. I love myself more than I love anybody else. And so I'm going to decide that, goodbye. I need to set this boundary for me because my children, as I tell people as a parent educator, your children are watching you. You are their guides. So if I'm in front of them and I'm taking this, what am I teaching them as well? So I had to put my big girl panties on and say, you know what? Time to set some boundaries.
One of the things about putting your big girl panties on is that you're making a decision that you're going to act on. One of the things I always tell my clients is that you don't have a problem, you have a decision to make. That decision is not an easy one because, as you indicated, there are thoughts that are coming into your head about self love, about who you are. But there's also those thoughts on the other side. The enemy is trying to say, nah, you can't make it out here without that person. You go ahead and you take that and you submit to that person because you can't do anything out here on your own. That's one of the things, and you know that causes people to stay in situations that are not healthy for them. So talk a little bit about, how you can hear different things and what voice to listen to.
So, you know, that gut voice, that first voice tells you to flee, fight, go. That's the voice you need to listen to. That other voice is saying, hey, but what are you going to do about this? Who's going to take the care of the kids when you go to work? Who's going to do this or that? Or so many women don't want to be without that picture. If you know me, I'm not a picture girl. I couldn't care about pictures. So it made it a little easier for boundaries to be made. But that family unit, we're told children in a single household, this is, the statistic for them to be this is this and blah, blah, blah. But an unhealthy household is even worse than a single parent household, because a single parent household doesn't mean that that's a bad place or space, but it was not a healthy space for them. And so I think about this a lot. And as a certified mental health instructor and a domestic violence facilitator and an international speaker now, when I'm speaking sometimes, I've been in places in the state that I'm in, and I'll see ladies that knew me from back then. And I know a lot of ladies, hey, y'all married? I'm happily married right now. I'm not about that picture. And if I'm unhappy, I'm going to set a boundary, okay? But I see women that will come up to me 15 years, almost 20 years later, and they're like, I should have made the choice I should have done what you did. But they have to make a choice, like you said, and be okay with that choice.
And the purpose of the pause, we're going to get into that in so many different areas, but I wanted to talk about the domestic violence aspect of it and the poverty, what happens, because I want people to see that it can be done and you can get through it and you can be successful and you can have a peace and you can have a good life. And I think it's important, and I'm going to share some information for people that may be in the situation and they are finally at the place where they have the courage to make the decision they need to make. So I'm going to be able to share some information about you and how they can get in touch with you and some different resources that you may have for them. Is that okay?
Sure. And I would love to say, I love what you just said too, Pam, about the poverty part. Getting uncomfortable to be comfortable and to be confident, right? And so when I left that marriage, I was a work at home, stay at home mom, helped my ex spouse triple his business. We were doing amazing things with his that stuff, and I was doing amazing things in the community, and all that all felt good. But when I left that situation, I actually had to go away from some of the finance, and that was really hard.
And that's the part that most people are afraid of, that they're not going to be able to get through it because of that.
And I wanted to say, not only not get through it, but to get through it and then go back and share once you got through it. So I tell people now, I left that situation. I gave the cars back. I left the home. I was on the bus stop with my children, right? But I'm going to tell you something. Remember, I said we are a guide to our children. I saw my mother become a single mom and be able to do those things to raise her children. So I had something to reference. And that's why we want to remember the things we're doing in front of our children are so important. But that was a lot. I even had to get on services for 3 months, social services for 3 months. And I remember getting on those services, I think it was 2 or 3 months, it had to be at least 3 months, but that was too much doggone work. I ended up working for social services, okay? You know, you gotta figure it out. And so being okay to understand this is my pause, my stop for right now as I get myself to the next space in safety and confidence, and my children watching me, seeing it, succeed, right?
I love that you said this is my pause. You just took pause in a totally different direction, which is great. This is what perspective is all about. You take a pause because in that pause, it's so critical and it's healthy that you take that pause in order to get to the next level whenever you're in a transition. You just brought up a memory that I think it's important to share. I remember I had to do the exact same thing. I had to go on social services for probably about 3 months until I could secure a job that paid enough to put my two kids in daycare. And this was right after my husband and I had separated, the kid's father, and I had to go to the welfare office. Went to the welfare office, keeping in mind this is the first time I'd ever been there. And I remember I had paperwork I had to complete. And when I got to the desk, the young lady that was sitting there, she looked like she had a pretty long day, but yet it was before lunch. And maybe she was hungry, I don't know. But at any rate, when I brought the paperwork up, got to my turn, sat in the table behind the partition, the plexiglass partition. I sat there and she didn't even say hello. And all she did was, put her hand out for the paperwork. I said, hello, good morning. I put the paperwork out. She didn't say a word. And then she looked through the paperwork, just kind of with her finger thumbing down. And then she looked up and handed me the paperwork back and said, you did not fill all the paperwork out. I need you to fill this out and come back. And at first I was like, okay, I know I took time to do this paperwork, but you know what? I didn't like her attitude. I didn't like the way she was talking to me. She was talking to me in a very derogatory manner, as if I didn't matter, as if I wasn't important. So at the time, I had to take a pause, Theresa. I had to take a pause, and I grabbed my paper, and I was upset, and I said, excuse me. I said, you don't know me and I don't know you. This is my very first time getting here, but I don't like the tone of the way that you just spoke to me. So let's start over again. Hello, my name is Pam. She had someone sitting next to her, just kind of looked when I was talking, looked at me, looked at her, and put her head back down and started writing with her pen and paper. But that was a boundary. I had to set that boundary because there was no way that you were going to stereotype me and treat me a way that wasn't the way that I deserved to be treated. Actually, no one that steps in that door deserves to be treated any less than anybody else, especially not less than the person that's working there. But I just had to share that based on what you had just said, because we got to make sure that we keep our dignity and that we don't allow anybody to treat us a certain way because of our financial situation or economic status, right? We don't do that. So I just wanted to share. And don't accept it. Don't accept it from anybody. Make sure you pause if you have to, so you don't go ballistic. But also make sure you pause to the point and say, you know what? I deserve better than this. And then you set that boundary externally, because your internal boundary was, I deserve better than this. And your external boundary is your communication that, you know what? This is not satisfactory to me. Let's start over. So let's talk about some of the things. Theresa and I were talking earlier today because we were talking about this podcast. We were cutting up. We were just having a great conversation because we were looking at, okay, what's going to impact people the most? What do they need to know? Because I could call this boundaries, boundaries, and then people get like, oh my God, more boundaries, more boundaries. But y'all don't understand. Y'all need boundaries in every single area of your life. Don't think that this is excluded or this or that is excluded. It's not. You need boundaries. When you wake up in the morning, you need boundaries. You go to bed at night, you need boundaries. To have a conversation with anyone, if you're in business, if you're not, if you're an employee, if you're retired, if you're in school, whatever it is, you need boundaries. So we thought about it, we talked about it, and we thought, okay, what's the foundation for a boundary? What does it need to take? The purpose of the pause is what we're going to just kind of elaborate on, because a lot of people don't think about that. And Theresa can tell you situations she just went through. And I told her a situation about my husband. He's a choleric personality, or a driver. He's straight to the point. He shoots from the hip, and his personality is totally different from mine. So typically when something comes up and I ask him a question, he'll automatically say no. Or if his kids ask him a question, he'll say no. And I have to say, hold on a minute. You didn't even hear the whole thing. Let me explain myself before you give me an answer. That is a pause. When I'm forcing him to pause before he makes a decision. Because a lot of times our boundaries, the unhealthy ones, are based on a knee-jerk reaction, or it's based on an emotion. We got to make sure that our internal boundaries have been thought through, and that we pause to make sure that we are considering the other person. We're considering where our head is at a given time. Maybe it's not a good time to set a boundary. That's the pause that we have to be mindful of. So Theresa, tell us a little bit about how a pause before you set boundaries is so important for you.
Even though I'm a lot like your spouse, I'm a very direct kind of girl. I think that's one of the reasons I have to have a pause. One of the reasons, because I pretty much know what I want and I don't want. And sometimes you're thinking, no, I don't want that. Or you feel like, for me, you might feel like you have to say something right now. You have to respond now, because that's how I operate. So the pause is important to me to make sure that I'm actually listening to the other person, number one. And then number two, I'm listening to my gut instinct and not reacting out of, maybe I feel pressured or I feel emotionally that I'm supposed to, hey, yes, I'm supposed to say yes or no. I also think the purpose of the pause is sometimes you need to really sit down and think. Like, really sit down and think.
You have to think, you have to pause, but that person is right in front of you and they're looking for an answer. So what have you learned about that pause in that situation? And also what happens differently if you don't?
I think what I've learned in that situation is I might ask them something like, give me some more information. What did you mean by that? Give me some time to get back to you.
Yes, that is key, because people think that they have to give an answer right away. And to touch on what you said, the personality between you and my husband, that they're similar, it takes practice. It really does. And here's one thing I found, especially with my husband, because he's learning, is that when he wants to come back at me with an immediate answer and I don't answer right back, or I don't get my knee-jerk reaction of, what are you talking about? What do you mean? Well, come on, or something like that. Then he automatically says, okay, hold on. Because he's learning, well, let me ask you a question. And here's the other thing. When they give you, like your personality gives us a no, we can say, let's just circle back. Let's come back to this. And from your perspective, on your side, Theresa, when you get to the point where your personality gives you, and you don't get a chance to pause because you didn't remember to pause, even as you get into the conversation before it gets heated, then you can say, you know what, maybe this isn't a good time to have this conversation. Let's take some time. I don't know. I got to go do this. You got to go do that. Maybe we can touch back base in about 2 hours, or maybe tomorrow we can address this. This is why this is so important, because it gives you the time to do that pause. That is a pause. And then you get a chance to think, okay, what do I really want to say? How do I really want to do this? And is this going to benefit me? Or am I just people pleasing if I say yes? Or am I being too harsh without thinking through it if I just say no? Your thoughts?
I think I've actually done that some with my spouse because my husband is more like you. He's going to think it through. I'm more of a big picture person. That's why I can say no quickly. I'm not a detail person all the time. I'm a big picture person. He's a detail person. Opposites attract. We can work together. But one of the things that I've learned with the pause is what you said. I'll say something like, hey, let's, pick another time to talk. Or you might have to have times that are best for you all to talk, right? And that might be helpful. But also, the purpose of the pause is like dealing with your children. I was talking to somebody the other day. I have to tell my husband this when it comes to the kids. Like, don't tell them that right now. Pause before you tell them that. Because we're in this you might get in a heated discussion with them because now they didn't understand it's not that time. You can pause and go back to it. And then in life situations, I know, like going through domestic violence or dealing with mental health, with a child having mental health, or dealing with depression myself, I had to learn that sometimes I need to pause. Even your thoughts, you have to redirect your thoughts. Take a pause from that thought process and say, I'm not dealing with that right now. I'm going to go over here and focus on this. So when you talk about pausing, setting boundaries, right? It helps in so many ways. And lastly, I would say, as a businesswoman, you definitely have to make some pauses because you will buy every daggone thing. I remember I used to support everybody, right? And I was buying all these darn books. If you know me, I'll tell you, I don't buy books anymore because I didn't read none of them darn books. If it's not on audio, it's not happening. I read a few of them, but I had to learn to say, no, I'm not interested because pausing also impacts your social, your emotional, your financial, everything. So when I think about that pause, I think it's really important. But that is why it's great that I say no easily. Saves a few dollars.
That just brings me to a point. I just did a conference and I made sure I took money out for the vendors so I could support them. I was tempted, but I knew I had to set a boundary around my finances so that I could support people, but not go overboard, go over my budget. Because you know what? When you don't set boundaries around your budget, and that's another podcast. I'll put a link on that. We talked about that, about finances and putting boundaries around your finances. You will get yourself in trouble. Then you'll end up being mad at somebody else for something that you did. You know what I'm saying? So I just think it's so important. It's key what you just said, because that is a boundary. A pause is a boundary. It's an internal boundary that's key in order for your response to not be a reaction and in order for it to be a healthy one, because you took the time to think it through.
I definitely agree. And I definitely agree with you for those vendors and stuff at events. I have a wonderful lady on one of my teams, and she's all about money. And a few years ago, I was complaining about all these events I'm going to, spending too much money. She's like, listen, you got to set yourself a budget for them. So exactly what you just said. And if I don't want it, I'm not buying it.
For things I wanted, I still couldn't buy. But you know what? I'll have their cards and I'll get back to them next month when my budget gets refilled. Okay. When we talked about the purpose of the pause, you and I spoke earlier and we were having conversations about setting boundaries with children, especially the children that are adult children, whether they're living in our home or they're not in our home any longer. A lot of questions have been coming to me lately about setting boundaries with adult children. And a lot of times those children are, and there may be children that have special needs. So it's got to be challenging. But I know with your background in mental health that you understand some of the important things that we need to consider. So when it comes to the pause, what are some of the things that you you can share as far as setting boundaries and pausing prior to the boundary when it comes to our adult children?
Any child or young adult that you're parenting, whether they're typical, if you call, or if there is a typical or a special needs child, is one, really understanding to give some sort of clarity and power that they are adults now, and stepping back from being a child parent to an adult parent. So they have to be given choices and options, and you have to give them clarity, kind of holding, handing over the baton, saying, yes, I'm still your parent, but there are some things that you're going to be responsible for. So, one thing is you don't have to do everything for them all the time. I have a teenager that will be going off to college soon. She is entering adulthood. Now, we have older children too, but she decided she's not driving yet. She didn't finish doing everything she needed to do. She has a job. So I can't always get you to work, right? So we're going to have to talk about how will you get to work? What does that look like financially for you, right? Because everything is not my job. And as a parent, you're teaching them to be independent. So if you're teaching them how to be independent and you take them to work, you pay for all their things, you give them no responsibilities. And I know we're in a different economy and more adult children are living at home, but our children also have to have boundaries and work ethic. And so that's one way, is being very clear with your children and stepping away and saying, you know what? I want them to be independent and live on your own.
All right, so let me stop you for a second. You talked about your children, you talked about teaching them independence. You've also talked about setting an example for them. But one of the hardest thing for parents in that transition from children, even teenagers that are transitioning out, or even adult children, is not button in, not giving advice if it's not asked for, understanding that they are adults. So that's where I was going earlier with you, Theresa, about, walking in their shoes. How can we help parents to transition their thought process in how to help their children, and what boundaries we need to set in order to help them based on the things that you said about independence and the example?
So, what I'm hearing you say is, how do we give them some skills to be independent and not us always butting in and thinking we have to save the day?
Exactly.
So, one is having a conversation of, like, the 70-year-old in my house, I'm telling her now, you're 17, at 18, these are some things I'm expecting you to be able to do on your own. So, like their bank account, right? If they're working, you need to be saving some of your money, because that is your money and you are preparing for your future. Or you might just want some extra spending money, outside of what I'm offering. And explaining to them, I was talking to that particular child and I was telling her about, maybe you put 10% of what you make away, or 50% or whatever, you decide the percentage, but then you'll have money to use later on, versus them being young adults. And now they're spending everything and they're coming to you when they're short, and you give it to them all the time when they're short. How do they learn from that, right? So that's one way I can think of it. Another way is just being responsible for yourself as you're growing into life. Maybe you're already in your 20s and you have adult decisions to make about school or career or college or whatever. And it's not up to me to give you all your suggestions. I need to pause. What are you good at? What are you nervous about? What are you not so good at? Where are your strengths? Having a pause, ask those questions and listen, and then tell them, how do I put it? You may want to think about, or you could, but you should not be the word coming out of your mouth to your children unless it's something that is detrimental to them. Now, if it's detrimental to them, especially mentally, maybe you learn some other ways to put it. But if it's not detrimental to them or hurting them at risk of harm or something, these are things you should think about. You shouldn't be telling them you should do blah blah. You could think about this, Or maybe have you thought about, because let's put ourselves back in their shoes. When we heard from our parents, no matter what age, what we should have, could have done, we like, nah, we ain't doing it. We're not doing it. Cause you telling me what to do. And as one of my children said, I'm gonna live my best life and I'm gonna make all the decisions I want, and it's gonna be a great life. And I tell her, that's wonderful. However, life doesn't always go like that. But I wish you the best of luck and let's still plan. But it's her life, not mine. So one thing I want to say, remember this, it's not your life. Stop living through your children, some of you. Just point blank, period. When I see all your moms out there posting pictures all the time of your daughters and all their outfits and their whole bodies, that this isn't your life, whether the outside or the inside. This is their life. And how would you want to be treated? And how did you want to be treated as a young adult?
There's so many people that are doing that. And I wanted you to talk on that. And I love that you put it straight to the point. That's my Theresa. She put it straight to the point. That is not your life. That is their life. But I love what you said about the, walking in their shoes. Take some time, take a pause and consider where this person is. For example, and I wanted to get on this because the conversation you and I just had was about children, teaching them and helping them and not doing all the things for them. But what happens when your child that's an adult makes a mistake? And you know that they know better, but they made that mistake. And you're like, we can want to rescue them. Like you said, the thing, paying for it or doing that, but we gotta, I'm gonna see if I can I can't even find a pencil to bite our tongue and just hold back and not do anything, especially if we're used to rescuing our kids. We feel we're justified in rescuing our kids. But when they become adults, they're making decisions and they make mistakes. How do we help them through the mistakes that they make when we know they know better?
One, be transparent. I made mistakes too, right? I made mistakes too. I talk to my children all the time about some of the mistakes I made or decisions I made that I wish I would have thought through, So you can share your advice. Sometimes I don't want to listen, but it's great to share, right? And then the other thing is pausing before you react. Pausing before you react. And that's hard because you say that's a hard pill to swallow whenever with your children, you want to feel like it's my child. So just sitting and being able to yeah, we all make mistakes, but what would you do different? Ask questions. Why did you put yourself in that situation? What happened? What did you learn from it? Let them think it out. And even if they can't think it out right then, I tell my kids all the time, go make a pros and cons list. What was a pro? What was a con of that? Or before, if you teach them that, then you can say next time, make a pros and cons list. Why wouldn't I do that? Why would I do that? So you give them some skills if you can, but also give them some grace. Give them some grace. Now, if the child has done it over and over again and you having to bail them out of jail or pay all this money for tickets or something, hey, this is my second time doing it or my third time, strike, you're out. And be stern with that. Be stern with that because they may not always have mommy and daddy to run to or auntie or uncle to run to because that person may not be there. They may not be available or able to do it. And so when you're helping them set these skills and boundaries, they're learning to be independent, but they're also learning life skills. And that's what a lot of young adults are missing is life skills, the work ethic, the chores, the life skills, because we as parents have made it so easy for them because of the world we live in now. So when we talk about the boomers and the Gen Xers, our parents didn't do that. No, they didn't do that. They were like, my brother and I were just talking about this. My dad said, you got a bus pass, you know how to get there. Grew up in a middle-class family. Educators as parents were educators. But I am so very grateful they taught me how to be independent. Y'all know why? Because that little girl that got married at 21, 22 years old and experienced domestic violence, if they had not instilled those things, I would have felt more trapped in that relationship. but they taught me life skills to go fish on my own. And that's what parents need to do. Your children need to learn. You need to teach them how to fish so that they can eat. You don't keep fishing for them so that they can eat, because how will they ever learn how to fish?
Boom. I had to drop the mic. I do have a mic. I just dropped the mic. You just dropped the mic on that one. This is so powerful. This is so good for people to know. Because to your point, Theresa, they're adults and they got to learn from their mistakes. Consequences, there's consequences for every action. And if we rescue them from the consequences, then they're never going to understand what the next action is going to be.
It reminds me of when my 12th grader this year told me a week before school started, I really wish I could have homeschooled. Heck, homeschool? I never homeschooled any of the other kids. And I was about to say no. But the new improved Theresa on some days decided, on some days and some topics, I'm just joking, but she decided she would listen. And I said, oh, okay, well, tell me more about that. You never asked me that before. Tell me more. And I'm glad I listened to her, because it became that this senior year became a great senior year for her. No, she's not an adult, but teenagers, it's called teenagers because they're in between being children to adults. So we need to think about that transition in part too, because the way that I work with her is going to get her to a different footing as she starts to walk into adulthood. And I know that from our other children. So I listened to her. It ended up being a great year. We did homeschool, have never homeschooled before. We found a program. It was great. She got all A's and finished early. And what she was trying to avoid of dealing with additional stressors at school, now she avoided those stressors. She said she just wanted to get ready for the next steps of her life. Had I not listened to that, and I'm sending her to school and making her go, how would she feel emotionally? And also, the power of the pause is a way of showing your children and your people, whoever it is, your client, your husband, your wife, whoever, your auntie, your grandma, your sister, your brother, that you care and you're being supportive.
So that's interesting that you were talking about, the pause when it comes to transitioning adults from teenagers to adulthood and even adults. But tell us a little bit about, because I know you've got some really good credentials as it relates to special needs. How do we implement that pause when it comes to our children that have special needs, whether they're still at home or even if they're adults? Does that look any different, or would that be the same?
Thanks for asking. I think one of the things is really varying on what their special need is, the severity of their special need, right? So it's going to be different if your child is not able to move, or they're a little bit more fragile. It could be a physical special need, but it could also be a mental special need. So one thing when we think about pause, I think that in all of this as parents, it's a learning process to pause. And the way that we help them with their life skills is based on what we know. So as I tell parents that I work with as a parent educator, is making sure that you're getting some sort of support or some resources, or that you learn how to support your child based on his or her needs. And that means whether they are like the typical child or the child that has a special need, no matter their age, it depends on the severity and what that need is. So one way to pause and take some time for yourself to learn about their disability or about how their mind works. So I'm a mother. I also am a certified special needs advocate and an endorsed family infant specialist. So I didn't come about those things easily. I had a child that had a special need. I wanted to learn with this particular child. She had cerebral palsy and a bunch of cognitive disabilities. I didn't know what that was. I heard of it, but I didn't know how to support it. So one thing is, take a pause so that you can learn information about their diagnosis or whatever their limits are, so that you can be supported. But I learned from a lady years ago. She had a daughter that had cerebral palsy, and she used to tell me, I told her She has cerebral palsy, but cerebral palsy doesn't have her. So why I'm saying that is they still are capable of things, even if they cannot talk. I've worked with people as on a group home level or meeting one on one with special needs from severe disabilities to high functioning. So, not doing everything for them, if they can do a little thing for themselves, pause and let them hold that spoon. Help them hold that spoon. Again, we're still trying to give some form of independence and being of self. If they have a mental health diagnosis, sometimes I have a child with a mental health diagnosis, right? Sometimes I have to pause and say, wait a minute, I'm not going to react to that because of their mental health, they're acting like this. But how would I know that if I didn't take the time to learn about those disabilities or those needs? So that's one thing. And then the other thing is set realistic expectations. Set realistic expectations. And that's going to be a pause too. But you're not only just setting it with you, you're setting it with them. I have an associate, they have a child that has a disability. The child works, makes an income, lives some semi-independent. But she helped that child set expectations. And she paused. She could have said, like some parents, oh no, you got a disability. You ain't moving out. You can't do this. You can't do that. So that is what I would say for pausing for children that have or may experience a special need. And make sure that you're also pausing and think about, are they around all people? Are they included in things? So that's called being inclusive, meaning no matter what other people's needs are, I don't want my child that had cerebral palsy, she didn't have to be around children and people just in wheelchairs. Pause and think. They are people, and we want them to feel as included in life as they can be, because that's important. The last thing I want to say is pause, and if they can talk for themselves and think for themselves somewhat cognitively, you are their best advocate, but teach them how to advocate for themselves too. So there's so many ways you can put that pause. And I have a love for this here because I had a child with a special need, physical and cognitive, and I have a wonderful child that experiences a mental health condition.
That's good. That's good. Those are wonderful tips and things for people to consider. And I think one of the important things, and you kind of alluded to it when you said to pause and get as much information as you can about the disability. But one of the things I think is really important too, and is to pause for yourself, to pause for your self love, for your self care, because you're around my clients that have children with special needs. They're not children, they're adults. They get overwhelmed because they're around them all the time and they're dealing with it. It's time to take a break. How do you do that, Theresa?
So I love that you said that because I didn't have enough air in my lungs at the time to even. But honestly, I have a program. I've done this training before called Life Beyond Advocacy. And it talks about how do you become, as a caregiver, as a parent of someone that has a special need, how do you sometimes take off that hat or that helmet of advocate, caregiver, parent, and take care of yourself? And so one of the reasons, one thing to think about is enlisting support. So just like those kids, your young adults that were kids at one time that are still going to always be your children, no matter how old they are, make sure that you have a support system so that you can pause. So maybe you have another ally that you can do things together, you know, and then that's very important because that allows you to get self-care and a recharge. Because I have tons of clients that have adult children that have special needs. The ones I see successful are the ones going and doing things, they have a vacation, but they figured out how to find a caregiver. They might just have a day out every so often. Putting yourself in the whole schedule that you matter. And then also you have to let your children see that too, even if they have a special need or a diagnosis. As I tell my children, I'm a believer of God. So I taught them in my household, it's God, then it's myself, because I was here before anybody. I'm a married woman. Some women don't like this. Hey, this is you. But then it's my husband and my children. But you need to act that out. If you're saying, I come, and it's okay to say you come before them. I don't, that's your opinion. Some people say my kids come first. Well, if there is no you, there are no kids. There is no way for them to have you accessible or available. So make sure that you're taking your time for yourself and showing them how. And I'd love to give you more resources on that as well.
Well, that's definitely what I'm going to do is give you an opportunity to share some resources that I will be putting in the description of this podcast for those of you that are interested that need these or maybe able to share with someone you know. But I did want to say that's a boundary, Theresa, when you decide to pause for yourself and it's unapologetically that you do that because, and everyone's heard the phrase, on an airplane, you put the mask of oxygen on yourself before you do it on your kids. Because if you're not there to teach them and to have the strength and the courage and the energy to do it, then it's not going to be done. So thank you for sharing those tips, those ideas. And as I said, you do have some resources that I'll be putting in the description of this episode. But tell us a little about the resources because you have such a wealth of knowledge and credentials. Tell us, we talked about domestic violence, we talked about being a parent advocate and parenting skills, and we talked about, helping children with special needs. What are some of the resources that you can make available to them?
The first resource I think I want to make available is when we talk about mental health, because mental health is a part of our full health. As a certified mental health instructor as well, I think about like what resources are out there for you, your children, your family. So I want to first give the resource of 988. You can dial anywhere in America, 988, and that gives you a resource to call if you're thinking about hurting yourself or if you're having a mental health challenge. It's just like 911, so 988. I also want to talk about NAMI, the National Alliance of Mental Illness. I am what am I? I'm an instructor. I'm a facilitator. I'm a trainer. I'm a speaker for NAMI. And NAMI is the largest, it's actually the largest North American organization that focuses on mental health. And it's a great resource, free training. If you had a child with mental health, I'm a facilitator for one of their programs called NAMI Basics. We're doing a class right now. And it teaches you about different mental health diagnoses children have and how to deal with them. We even have a part in there that talks about self-care, right? How to take care of yourself. So I would say, NAMI, when you're thinking about, though, a child with a special need, a physical, a cognitive special need, maybe your child has ADHD. You can think about something like CHAD. CHAD is an organization that focuses on ADD and ADHD. So check out CHAD, great place. I have a child that experiences ADHD. And I remember being able to go on there one night and I Googled something somehow and I was online on a support group listening. I said, oh, okay. So it offers that. Same with NAMI. They offer free information, training, etc. CHAD has some things that cost as well, but they have a lot of free information online. And then special needs, there are several organizations that talk about special needs. One that's in different states is called Parent to Parent, depending on the state. And then you'll put Parent to Parent of Maryland, Parent to Parent of Georgia in there. And then lastly, domestic violence. Of course, the Partnership Against Domestic Violence. That's a great place to look. But you can also Google in your city. I had a young lady I was talking to a few months ago, and she told me something she was experiencing domestic violence wise. You never know who's watching, right? And she reached out and I said, hold on, let me look at your city. We found all these things. And maybe you're not ready for this help right now. You're not ready for the domestic violence help. You're not ready to be real about your child has ADHD, a mental health diagnosis, a special need. But what better thing to do if you're not ready now to put it in your toolbox, get that information. So when you're ready, as you get stronger and you set those boundaries, that you'll have that in your toolbox to help you and your family more.
Well, thank you, Theresa, for that. I know that your experience and your wealth of knowledge and just living life and pulling yourself up by the bootstraps, all those things shows just what a powerful woman you are. And the compassion then that you have for people really helps to help them to understand that you're listening, and it gives them the courage and the strength and the inspiration to do the things that they need to do. So in closing, just want to ask you, Theresa, do you have any final thoughts or words that you want to share with our audience today?
Really listen to that pause. That pause can get you through a lot in life. In the world that we live in now, the pause is going to be needed because we can't just react. We have to think, and we have to think with compassion and think of others. That's all I have.
The response is so much better than the reaction, and the reaction causes consequences that we don't want. So think it through. Pause before you set that boundary and make it a healthy boundary. This is Pamela Bird, your boundaries coach. And please make sure, as I said earlier, that you like, share, and subscribe to this podcast, because wouldn't it be a shame if there's a topic that we talked about and you missed it? Yeah, you can go back and record it, but there's nothing like being there for the real time that we're putting this on. So have a wonderful day, and we look forward to seeing you next time. Take care, and God bless.